My name is Michelle Sherman, and I am the Program Director for Pax Christi USA, the National Catholic Peace Movement. Thank you for joining this evening for our event, Building a Civilization of Love, a Pax Christi USA panel on Magnifica Humanitas. In May, Pope Leo XIV released his first encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. Thank you for joining us for this special webinar about the encyclical, its messages and lessons. Our panelists tonight will discuss Catholic social teaching, just peace, war, labor, economic justice, education, and more. We are so grateful to have Pax Christi Young Adult Caucus member and software engineer Jessica Sun, Eli McCarthy, a theologian who teaches at Georgetown University and who has been part of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative since its inception in 2016, and physicist Prasad Venugopal from the University of Detroit Mercy. This evening, I'll introduce each speaker before they speak, followed by listening to them share for about 15 minutes. Then we'll have a pause moment, a moment to integrate what they've shared. At that time, I'll also invite us to capture some words or phrases from their presentation that inspire us to learn more. We'll be dropping those into the chat. Following each presentation from our speakers, then we'll have some time for them to have some interaction and feedback with each other before moving towards question and answers in the chat. If a question comes up for you during the presentations, please drop them in the chat and I'll hold them for later at the end of our session. So welcome again. If you have any technological issues during this webinar, please send a private message to myself or Judy Code, who is our Director of Communications and is on the call. So let us begin. First, we welcome Eli McCarthy, PhD, who teaches at Georgetown University in Theology and Religious Studies, as well as Justice and Peace Studies. His recent book is an edited volume called A Just Peace Ethic Primer, Building Sustainable Peace and Breaking Cycles of Violence. Since 2012, he has worked on federal policy with advocacy coalitions on peace building, foreign policy, immigration, environment, etc. Presently, he is a Just Peace Fellow with the Franciscan Action Network and a steering committee member of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, a project of Pax Christi International. Eli is also the co-founder of the DC Peace Team, which offers training in nonviolent communication, restorative justice, bystander intervention, anti-racism, trauma awareness, as well as unarmed civilian protection deployments. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Eli.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. It's wonderful to be with everyone in the Pax Christi community and more broadly. I'm excited for this journey tonight and to kind of learn and explore together. So I'm going to kind of share my screen here and dig into the encyclical, starting with just kind of a map of like what were the sections. We'll dig into kind of a core question that Leo's wrestling with, and then focus on his section on the culture of power and the civilization of love and some of the key themes that come up there as we kind of go forward. So these were the 5 chapters, right? The dynamic approach, faithful to the gospel, looking at Catholic social doctrine, the grandeur of humanity in light of the promises of AI, safeguarding humanity, truth and freedom and work, and the culture of power and the civilization of love. So one of the key questions that Leo is kind of wrestling with in this is how do we recognize and live in accord with our sacred human dignity? Now, Pope Francis, back in 2017 in his World Day of Peace message, made a contribution to this question, and he said, especially in situations of conflict, let us respect this, our deepest dignity, and make active nonviolence our way of life. So Leo is working in this kind of trajectory, and a couple of things that he sees in our society today is this normalization of war and how AI is accelerating military violence, and that this is being legitimated by a kind of false or distorted political realism, which he describes as a mentality of armed equilibrium and deterrence, unquote. Or another way he says it, that war is an inevitable part of human nature. This is the distorted realism. Or other ways to think of this is the only way to deal with aggressors is through war, or that war is effective for order or sustainable peace. These are all versions of this distorted political realism. So let's take a look at a few of his specific quotes here. In 110, he says, "I'd like to employ the expression to disarm, which is close to my heart. Disarming means freeing it from the mentality of armed competition, which today is not limited simply to military context, but also to economic and cognitive phenomena." And then in 124, he says, "Certain events make it clear that history can also change when individuals truly take the dignity of everyone seriously." So what does that look like? The examples he gives, the civil rights movement in the US with Martin Luther King, ending apartheid in South Africa when Mandela was released and he decided to kind of, what he says, not to surrender the future to hatred by going through the TRC and so forth. And many courageous and generous women, and he lists St. Teresa of Calcutta, Dorothy Day here in the US, and a number of others as well. So he is kind of linking dignity with nonviolent resistance, that this is what it looks like to take the dignity of everyone seriously. So as he continues, in section 183, he says, AI acts as an accelerating factor in these processes. What is created for defense can be rapidly repurposed for offense, and the fine line between protection and aggression becomes blurred. In 192, he says, today, more than ever, without prejudice to the right to self-defense in the strictest sense, it's important to reaffirm that the just war theory, which has all too often been used to justify any kind of war, is now outdated. And then his next line is, humanity possesses far more effective and capable tools for promoting human life and resolving conflicts, such as dialogue, diplomacy, forgiveness, and so forth. And then in 198, he says, no algorithm can make war morally acceptable. AI does not remove the intrinsic inhumanity of conflict or war in this case. So in other sections, Pope Leo does refer to certain principles like last resort or protection of civilians, or even points toward proportionality, though he doesn't always say these principles continue to be valuable, particularly proportionality. Now, these have in the past been associated with just war theory. Yet, he also refers to other principles, not only those in CST, like dignity and social justice and the common good, but also principles especially relevant to AI, like human responsibility and a moral time frame versus speed and expediency. So, what is kind of happening here? The development of doctrine in the Catholic tradition tends to move with sort of zigs and zags, or kind of spiral motions. That is, we kind of move forward a bit to see how something lands, and then maybe circle back for a moment to name some traditional themes. And then there's some period of maybe ambiguity, and then we harvest something new out of that spiral process. So let's go back for a moment then to Pope Francis. In Fratelli Tutti, 2020, section 258. He says, war can easily be chosen by invoking all sorts of humanitarian or defensive excuses. In recent decades, every single war has been ostensibly justified. We can no longer think of war as a solution because its risk will probably always be greater than its supposed benefits. In view of this, it's very difficult to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries to even speak about the possibility of a just war. Never again war. And then he kind of offers this sort of footnote strategy, which is really notable in Catholic social teaching. Popes will put something in the footnote, which is sort of maybe a next step, but they're not ready to kind of put it in the main text, but they want to kind of plant a seed. So here he says in the footnote, St. Augustine, who forged a concept of just war that we no longer uphold in our day. Notice he says concept, not simply language. So, a couple years later, in 2022, he had some other really notable statements. March of that year. Wars are always unjust because the one who pays is the people of God. There was a time, even in our churches, when people spoke of a holy war or a just war, but today we cannot speak in this manner. 2 days later, there's no such thing as a just war. They do not exist. June 30th, as believers, we must find these answers to these difficult questions in the gospel and Jesus, who calls us to be merciful and never violent. On October 18th, the events of these first 2 decades compel me to add that there is no occasion in which a war can be considered just. So what are the implications here? This sort of spiral motion, and Pope Leo is picking up on this, and he says it is important to reaffirm, right? It's already been sort of named in Pope Francis to reaffirm that the just war theory, which has all too often been used to justify, is now outdated. So first, Pope Francis and Leo, it seems, are inviting us to move on from the orientation, the concept, and the language of just war theory. So two, it's not about updating just war theory with better principles, as some have argued, but about finding a new framework or style of reasoning or approach for our present context. So the Pope may refer to some principles that were in the past part of just war theory, but he doesn't describe them as just war principles. And they don't necessarily need to be described or reinscribed as just war thinking. They can be standalone principles, or better yet, transformed into a different style of moral reasoning or a new moral framework. Also, Pope Leo doesn't say we need to just better remember just war theory or its reasoning, nor does he say we need to better commit to it through stronger formation or education. Something more transformative is going on. So I'm going to share this link with you after my kind of presentation, but it kind of goes through about 9 different reasons to support what Pope Leo is promoting here. And I'll just kind of reflect a little bit on the first 3. That number 1, that's just war theory, and these have come through global conversations through our various conferences at the Vatican since 2016, folks from all different parts of the world. The first one here is that just war theory has failed to adequately prevent or limit war. This is over a conclusive period of time across cultures and types of society. It's mostly been used to justify wars, especially by political leaders and sometimes religious leaders. So it's more about how just war theory functions rather than the good intention that some may have in utilizing it. And how it's functioned is it's not been able to adequately prevent or limit war. And that's been the claimed purpose for many over the years. And it's not about whether just war theory has been applied correctly or abused. It's not merely about others misusing it. It's not merely about realist versus permissive uses or permissive uses versus restrictive uses, but how it has generally functioned. So Cardinal McElroy has said the just war ethic itself has, quote, become only a little bit less than a green light for war and increasingly ineffective at restraining war. The second one, even if just war theory, even if it seems in a situation that a situation meets some or all of the criteria of a just war, we still consistently get stuck in cycles of dehumanization and violence. We saw this pretty clearly with World War II, leading to the Cold War and numerous proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam and Guatemala and Afghanistan. And that led to 9/11 and then 20 more years of war in Afghanistan. Ukraine is another example today. Such cycles of military violence also create massive flows of refugees, generational trauma, and increased violent social habits, such as domestic violence and sexual assault. And research supports these examples as illustrative of a consistent pattern with war and scaled military operations. So the third one, the possibility of a just war, which is implied by the logic of just war theory, has correlated with or tends to go along with significant structural and cultural violence. That is, someone must keep preparing to win a potential just war. And thus it requires an ongoing arms race and investment and diversion of resources. The corresponding cultural violence arises in the form of dehumanizing social habits generated by the training for war, the media propaganda to support war, and generational trauma from the experience of war. So there's 6 other reasons, and I'll let you read more about it in the article, but things like it fails to get to the root causes, violates human dignity, or care for the environment. At best, it distracts us from Jesus's way and even may obstruct us from that way. So the exciting part of this moment is what it may open up for the church to see, to focus on, and to witness to human society, not only in how we may respond to conflict, but also how we think about defense. So this question of legitimate defense, how might we develop a moral framework for this theme or this situation? I suggest we consider what we are defending and explore a range of types of defense options. We need not equate defense with military force. Now, some have proposed the idea of proportional defense as an alternative to just war theory or a next step. However, this still generates the kind of tit-for-tat bombings, killings, and cycles of violence, if not ongoing war. A good example of this is what's going on in Iran right now between them and the US over the past few months, particularly. The praxis of such proportional defense also violates human dignity by cultivating generational trauma, lowering of empathy, and a sense of gift. Notably, Jesus said pretty clearly that you were taught an eye for an eye. But I tell you, love your enemies, do good to those who do evil, and assert your dignity in the turning the other cheek story. So this seems to be a call to go beyond an eye for an eye or proportional violence as a form of defense. So when we move with Francis and Leo and Jesus to center active nonviolence, this helps us to make dignity the focus of our defense rather than possessions or territory or national interest, and on a certain style of defense that focuses on unarmed civilian protection, nonviolent resistance, and nonviolent civilian-based defense. And there's empirical evidence that supports the greater effectiveness of these styles of defense versus war or violent defense. We may even shift from the language of legitimate defense to the language of legitimate security, since that helps us to focus more on the actual need at stake rather than an us versus them posture or mentality. So I'm going to wrap up with just a couple trajectories, resources, contributions as we kind of move forward together. One of them is since the 80s, actually, many Catholic and Christians have been working on an alternative moral framework to help facilitate these moves, which is rooted in the gospel of nonviolence and empirical evidence. So, a just peace framework focuses on three categories: virtue, skill, and skills to transform conflict, breaking cycles of violence, and building more sustainable peace. And it provides a set of norms that people can use to discern if certain actions or strategies are consistent with these norms, or at least don't kind of obstruct such norms. So I'm not going to go into all these now. I'll send you a link which kind of unpacks each of these, but you see things like learning nonviolent skills, participatory processes, um, keeping our means consistent with the ends, rehumanization in our language and narratives, nonviolent direct action, acknowledging responsibility for harm, relationality and reconciliation, ecological sustainability, economic, gender, and racial justice. And I'll share these other links about just peace cases in a moment. So let me end here by just kind of going back to Pope Leo for a moment in 214, where he says the first contribution we can make toward a more humane civilization is to be mindful of our words. Let us disarm words, and we will help to disarm the world. We must say no to the war of words and images. We must reject the paradigm of war. So another way to think of this is the skill of nonviolent communication. And there are a lot of trainings that can help us learn and practice that skill. In fact, one of the efforts of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative is to develop these nonviolent skill training hubs. And we've got 8 or 9 different types of skills, from restorative justice to bystander intervention. And working to try to develop these hubs where universities or parishes, et cetera, will commit to having at least 1 or 2 trainings a year. So Georgetown, BC, San Francisco, Manhattan have all made those commitments. So to end, how do we recognize and live in accord with our sacred human dignity? 1, by living active nonviolence as a way of life. 2, letting go of just war theory and reasoning. 3, focusing defense on dignity and styles of defense, on unarmed protection, nonviolent resistance, and civilian-based defense. 4, shifting to a just peace framework and process. And 5, building our skills through nonviolent training. Thank you, and peace be with you.
Thank you so much, Eli. And thank you for your ongoing commitment and work with the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. It's a real gift to have your experience in this space and to distill pieces of Magnifica Humanitas with us. I would like to, Eli's already put it in. I had a little draft of that same thing in there. Yes, I'd really encourage you to click on the link in the chat. It's an article written by Eli for Political Theology, and what he's done is write a letter from the just war theory, saying it's time to let go. Love can let go. So it's a very poetic way in which Eli distills and invites us to consider that it's time to let go, as Pope Francis and Pope Leo have encouraged us. Thank you. Let's just take a moment to consider what Eli has shared with us. And if there's a word or a phrase that stays with you from his presentation, I invite you to drop that in the chat now. We have words and phrases like inherent dignity, no more war, outlaw all war, defense of dignity, disarm AI, free it from armed competition, caring for life, nonviolent words, nonviolent communication, and dignity. So we'll continue with these themes as we welcome our second speaker, Jessica Sun. Jessica Sun Shi-Lei is a second-generation economic settler immigrant and Chinese U.S. American zillennial from Northern Virginia. A Catholic convert after 10 years of identifying with varying philosophies as an agnostic, she finds a dear sense of belonging in spaces of zealous, gospel-led advocacy and action for just peace and nonviolence. Christians for a Free Palestine, Pax Christi USA, and the Progressive Asian American Christians are her organizing homes. A graduate of the Virginia Tech College of Engineering, she has worked as a software engineer by day, local activist by life. She is an incoming postulant with the Sisters of Providence of St. Mary's of the Woods. I'm so eager and so grateful to welcome Jessica.
Michelle, thank you so much. It's such a delight to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So I'll be talking a little bit more about AI, and these are kind of the sections I'm hoping to go over today. We'll start with an intro to AI, and then we'll go into debunking AGI or artificial general intelligence, then de-anthropomorphizing AI, and the importance of using the right nomenclature. A quick touch on TechReal, the 8 mythologies driving tech power, amazing tech whistleblowers that is making all of this work possible, and then how AI is being used for good and can be. So we'll start with defining artificial intelligence. And to do that, I'm going to read the work of two esteemed AI ethics experts, Dr. Emily Bender and Dr. Alex Hanna, in their book, The AI Con. So, as long as there has been research on AI, there's been AI hype. In the most commonly told narrative about the research field's development, mathematician John McCarthy and computer scientist Marvin Minsky organized a summer-long workshop in 1956 at Dartmouth College to discuss a set of quote-unquote thinking machines. Now, the term artificial intelligence is attributed to McCarthy. Fundamentally, the forerunners of this new field at the time were concerned with translating dynamics of power and control into machine-readable formulations. So McCarthy, Minsky, Herbert Simon, and Frank Rosenblatt were concerned with developing tools that could be used for the guidance of administration and ultimately military systems, because this is in the environment where the battle for US supremacy in the Cold War was being fought on all fronts. Right? These men sought to gain favor and funding in the eyes of a defense apparatus trying to edge out the Soviets. They relied on huge claims with little to no empirical support, bad citation practices, and moving goalposts to justify their projects, which found a lot of purchase in Cold War America. And so, these are the same set of practices that we see from today's AI boosters, although they are now primarily chasing market valuations in addition to government defense contracts. So, the first move in the original AI hype playbook was foregrounding the fight with the Soviets in the 50s. So, the second was to argue that computers were likely to match human capabilities by arguing that humans weren't really all that complex. In 1956, Minsky even claimed in an influential paper that human beings are instances of certain kinds of very complicated machines. If that were indeed the case, very useful for them, we could use more controllable electronic circuits in place of people in both military and industrial contexts. In the late 1960s, Joseph Weizenbaum, a German immigrant professor at MIT, and contemporary of Minsky, was alarmed by how quickly people attributed agency to automated systems. Despite grave limitations of early conversation simulators named ELIZA, Computer scientists used ELIZA even then to celebrate how thoroughly computers could replace human labor and heralded the entry into the quote-unquote artificial intelligence age. A shocked Weizenbaum spent the rest of his life as a critic of AI, noting that humans were, in fact, not meat machines. While Minsky went on to found MIT's AI laboratory and rake in funding from the Pentagon unhindered. So these murky, unethical funding frameworks continue to this day. Through unfettered weapons manufacturing, then, and with the addition of ballooning speculative venture capitalist investments now. So, does the drawing of false equivalencies between the human brain and the calculating capabilities of machines affect us? In huge ways today. Claiming these false equivalencies between human and machines inspires awe, right? Which it turns out can also be used to reel in boatloads of money from investors whipped into a fear of missing out frenzy. And I'm sure we've all seen this. The incentives to ride the AI hype train are clear and widespread. Dress anything up as AI and investments flow. But both the technologies and the hype around them are causing harm in the here and now. So I'm continuing from Bender and Hannah's article and work here, but there are many applications of machine learning or artificial intelligence, quote unquote, that are well scoped, well tested, and involve appropriate training data. And they deserve their place among the tools that we use on the regular basis. These include such everyday things as spell checkers and other more specialized technologies like image processing used by radiologists. But in the cacophony of all of these marketing and startup pitches, these sensible use cases are being swamped by promises of machines that can effectively do magic, apparently, leading users to rely on them for information, decision-making, or cost savings, which is often to the user's detriment or to the detriment of others. As investor interest pushes AI hype to new heights, tech boosters have been promoting AI solutions in nearly every single domain of human activity. There are myriad cases in which AI solutions have been posed but fall very short of their stated goals. And this is just one example here pictured, right? On our roads, promises of self-driving cars have led to death and destruction. A Tesla employee in 2022 died after engaging the so-called full self-driving mode in his Tesla Model 3, which ran the car off the road. And we know this partially due because of the passenger that survived this crash pictured here. A few months later, on Thanksgiving Day 2022, Tesla CEO Elon Musk announced the availability of Tesla's full self-driving mode. Hours later on that same day, the Tesla full self-driving mode was involved in an 8-car pileup on the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. In addition, we have seen firsthand how AI warfare is being used by Israel to carry out genocide in Palestine. Faulty facial recognition technology is tested on Gazans, and these are drones equipped with automatic guns, right, that are using faulty facial recognition to wipe out quote unquote targets or Palestinian civilians. For field executions, Palestinians are the laboratory on which surveillance and military technology and AI warfare is going to be tested and used in other places of war and around the world. The Washington Post revealed that Google Cloud employees had worked directly with the Israeli occupation forces to deliver AI tools, which contradicted Google's public claim of working only with civilian agencies. The Guardian also reported that Israel's Unit 8200 developed a ChatGPT-like model using stolen and intercepted Palestinian data, with assistance from tech employees on military reserve duty at Google, Meta, and Microsoft. Israel has even used an AI weapon, literally called the Gospel, in Gaza for 2 years to identify Palestinians to murder. This was bragging by an Israeli general. He said, to put that into perspective, in the past, we would produce 50 targets a year in Gaza. Now, with the Gospel, this AI weapon, we have 100 targets a day with over 50% of them being attacked. I really want to highlight the work of Humla, the Arab Center for the Advancement of Social Media, which is a nonprofit organization that advocates for Palestinian digital rights. In addition, Tech for Palestine is a coalition of thousands of founders, engineers, product marketers, investors, and other professionals working in support of Palestinian liberation, because we know tech does not have to be used that way. It does not have to be like it is. Next, I'm going to talk about debunking AGI, right? So, tech CEOs, futurists, and venture capitalists describe artificial general intelligence, or AGI, as if it were an inevitable and ultimate goal for technology development. But in reality, the term is a vague signifier for a technology that will somehow lead to an endless abundance for humankind, and conveniently also as a means to avoid accountability, as tech moguls make off with billions in capital investment and more alarmingly public spending. And I'm here reading again the work of Bender and Hanna. So AGI is a term that famously lacks a precise meaning, right? And certainly does not refer to any particular imminent technology. Definitions of AGI range broadly in ways that primarily suit the economic arrangements of the individuals and organizations ostensibly trying to create it, or the cultural mystique of a set of adherents to a set of fringe ideologies. Mark Zuckerberg has said that he does not have a one-sentence pithy definition of the concept. And embodying the mysticism around this term of AGI, AI singularity, Ilya Sutskever, the former chief AI scientist at OpenAI, would lead chants of feel the AGI around the office. In a leaked agreement, though, Microsoft and OpenAI crafted a much more well-defined metric, whether such a system of AGI could produce $100 billion in profit. In all these cases, the term AGI is meant to evoke something with awesome power, much like the term AI used to before it became overexposed in marketing. So when we give credence to the idea of AGI, it does multiple things in the real world. First, it signals that a computer program that is proficient at one thing, like spell check, can also somehow do important social and economic work. These are real proposals being made by powerful people right now. California Governor Gavin Newsom has suggested that traffic issues and homelessness can be solved in California with AI. Former Google CEO and board chairman Eric Schmidt said that we shouldn't worry about the climate emissions of AI systems because AGI will solve climate change for us. The second issue is closely related to the first because claims of AGI are a cover for abandoning the current social contract. Instead of focusing on the here and now, many people who focus on AGI think we ought to abandon all other scientific and socially beneficial pursuits. So these adherents to this myth of AGI believe that the only and best thing humans can do right now is work on a super intelligence, which will bring about a new age of abundance. So, if you also think this sounds weird, mystical, and godlike, you'd be correct. The last bizarre direction of discourse around AGI is that it plays into the idea of a big, possibly benevolent robot god who will rescue humans from themselves. That is, if we happen to imbue it with the right values. These people believe in one of two versions of a technological future. Either an AGI that is trained with proper values will lead to a world of limitless abundance, where we live in post-human forms, or a big robot superintelligence will wipe us out. People like Ray Kurzweil, a futurist and Google fellow, believe in the former, and specifically in an ideology known as the technological singularity. All of these ideas would have remained fringe if they did not have massive appeal influenced by major executives in industry and government. Even though AGI is poorly defined, fuzzy concept, it has an outsized impact in policy circles. Not only do promises of AGI motivate the Stargate initiative, for example, but such promises also help motivate limitations on all AI regulations. So the next time you see someone talk about the promise or threat of AGI, you should ask, what social or political problems are they interested in papering over? And how are they implicated in creating them or making them worse? I really want to next emphasize the work of Kyle Chan, who is a research fellow at Brookings, a DC think tank. He's the author of Substack High Capacity and specifically focuses on Chinese technology, industrial policy, and US-China competition. And he tells us that China's AI companies are playing a different game. While they are also rushing to build world-class foundation models, the notion of AGI as some abstract turning point in human history is much less discussed. Instead, Chinese AI developers are racing along other axes of progress: efficiency, adoption, and physical integration, driven by both industry constraints and Beijing's policy focus. Taken together, China's approach is a fundamentally different bet on how AI will shape the future. So he asks at the end of this article that how can we ensure that the US's massive investment in AI data centers is sustainable and does not crowd out other areas of AI development or economic activity? I personally very much share the belief that we need a moratorium on data centers in the US while our energy grid needs huge updates to become renewable before we can even think about these data centers. But Chan continues, concerns have been raised that data center investments are distorting the broader US economy, making up a large share of GDP growth, raising energy prices, and masking underlying problems here, like rising unemployment. These issues are not addressed, and the United States risks not only missing critical opportunities for AI innovation, but also pulling the rest of the US economy into a giant, risky bet on AI. Now, I'm going to touch over the next three topics quite quickly here. So, de-anthropomorphizing AI. Now, it's so important that we use the right, accurate nomenclature when we talk about AI, right? Language matters, we know this. And so instead of saying chatbot, we can say things like conversation simulator. Instead of answer, we can say output. Artificial intelligence is really probabilistic automation. There's another group called Better Images of AI. It's a global collaboration between academics, artists, and diversity advocates aiming to create a more representative and realistic visual language for AI systems, themes, applications, and its impacts. Briefly, I will touch on TESCREAL, the 8 mythologies driving tech power, coined by Dr. Tim McGebrew of the Distributed AI Research Institute. Dr. Tim McGebrew is also the founder of Black in AI. And there's just two of these 8 mythologies I'm going to highlight here. And one of these is transhumanism. The core belief of this belief is that the human body is outdated and that technology should enhance or replace it. And how we see this showing up is brain chips, CRISPR edits, longevity labs, and even immortality startups. And what this ignores, the wisdom of limitation, the value of impermanence, and the politics of who gets quote unquote upgraded. Another one of these themes is singularitarianism. A core belief is that a super intelligent AI will soon surpass humans and that we must align ourselves with it. How it shows up, alignment theory, AGI safety labs, doom and salvation discourse, and what it ignores, current harm, real workers, non-science fiction ethics, and the political economy of AI right now. So the tech whistleblower speaking truth to power that I borrowed heavily from today, especially, the first and foremost I point to is the Distributed AI Research Institute. Some of the greatest whistleblowers in the tech industry continue to be women, and Dr. Tim McGebrew put everything on the line to leave Google and to found this organization and continue to speak truth to power. I highly recommend you check them out. I will gladly make all these slides available to anyone who wants them. There are two books I really recommend that everyone read and that have been bestsellers. First is The AI Con by Bender and Hanna, and then The Empire of AI by Karen Howe, who was an insider in Silicon Valley venture capital circles. Finally, I really recommend the annotated encyclical by Hugging Face Society and Ethics. And they say here, Pope Leo's encyclical carries the Church's social teaching into the age of AI, grounded on a fundamental ethical AI principle. Technology is never neutral because it takes on the characteristics of those who devise, finance, regulate, and use it. The encyclical's call to free technology from monopoly, open technology to discussion and debate, and treat data as a shared good is close to the open source ethics and policy work of Hugging Face, and it continues to echo scholarship across the AI ethics field. And there are examples of AI being used for good. For example, Thora AI is an ethical alternative to ChatGPT, for example. It's another large language model that won't spy on you, won't steal your data, and is much more energy efficient than most large AI models. So I encourage you to check them out. In addition, there's a wonderful interview where Heidi Lim, a climate communicator, converses with Nadia Nadessim about small AI. So please check them out as well. A promising development earlier this year was Norway becoming the first country to nationalize AI. They are paying their newspapers 4.5 million USD annually to train a national AI that will be free to use by its citizens. And this is exactly what the benefits of AI should be used. The data is collectively made by all of us. We should all receive the collectivized fruits. Finally, I really would point you to this article by Corbin Trent, specifically Star Trek or Mad Max, We Get to Choose. And he references his friend, Zach Exley, who is the director of the think tank A New Consensus. Zach himself is a former tech lead and tech manager. And I think this is a really balanced, great electoral picture about what AI can be used for in the US going forward. So thank you so much. I'm really happy to talk about this. If anyone folks have questions, there's a lot more to say and delve into. And for now, I'll pass it back to Michelle.
Deep gratitude to you, Jessica. Thank you for all the research that you have put into your presentation and all of the ways that you have integrated your research and studies and distilled things down for us. I'd also like to acknowledge that Jessica was the organizer of the AI and Peace workshop at the 2024 National Conference, or 2025, excuse me, National Conference for Pax Christi USA. And so this work is something that Jessica, a software engineer, has integrated deeply into her studies, and we're just so grateful that you are here. Thank you. Let's take another moment to consider all that Jessica has shared with us. And if there is a word or a phrase that continues to speak to you, I invite you to put that into the chat. And thank you, Judy, for dropping the link for the workshop at the 2025 conference into our chat. Some of our nuggets of wisdom are: AI ignores the wisdom of limitation. Inspiration. AI can be used for good. In so many words, in weakness, strength. Free technology from monopoly, let it serve the common good. Impermanence, transhumanism, excuse me. Noting that the word gospel was used for the AI weapons in Gaza. Email AI, small AI, and multiple words of thanks for your presentation, Jessica. Before we move on, I'd just like to acknowledge that we have 129 people on the call. And so we've just been so glad to have so many of you learning along with us tonight. A few questions that I received personally in the chat and wanted to clear those up right now is that, yes, we are live streaming this presentation on Facebook on the Pax Christi USA Facebook page, and that the recording will be uploaded to the Pax Christi USA website sometime within the next week or so. So yes, so if you didn't catch everything this first go around, you can watch it again and pause and take notes. Okay. And now I look forward to welcoming our third presenter. Dr. Prasad Venugopal is a professor of physics and affiliate faculty in African American Studies at the University of Detroit Mercy. In addition to teaching courses in physics and astronomy, Prasad has developed and teaches a course for the AAS program called Science, Technology, and Race, which is part of the core curricular offerings at the university. Prasad's research interests are at the intersection of science, technology, and society, with a primary focus on race, gender, and surveillance issues. In his teaching, Prasad encourages students to engage with physics, science, and technology in a broader social context. Prasad is a board member of the Michigan chapter of Peace Action, the largest grassroots peace organization in the United States. He previously served as a national steering committee member of the United for Peace and Justice after the 2003 Iraq War. He is also active in other local peace, labor, and anti-racism organizations, including the Ferndale Inclusion Network, the Michigan Coalition for Human Rights, and the local Metro Detroit organization Conversations on Race. He served as the president of the University of Detroit Mercy Professors Union for several years. Prasad immigrated from India and lives in Ferndale, Michigan, with his wife and 2 children. And I also know that Prasad has given presentations for Pax Christi, Michigan as well. So we thank you for your insights today on local activism, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. People can hear me. I just want to double check that.
Yes.
Okay. And let me share my screen here. And hopefully it works out. Okay, people can see the slideshow, then we're good. So thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here, part of this very important conversation. My entry point into all these debates, and for those of you who don't know, the University of Detroit Mercy is a private Catholic university sponsored by the Jesuits and the Sisters of Mercy. So even though I'm not religious or Catholic or Christian, I have been immersed in the work of the university, especially its mission statement, as well as the universal apostolic principles of the Jesuits, as well as the critical concerns of the Sisters of Mercy, all of which bear upon the major issues of the day. I'll jump in with just talking about the genealogy of what Pope Leo presented in his encyclical. It was, if one has to go all the way back more than 100 years ago to the first encyclical that really he mentions, Rerum Novarum, and where he talks about the dignity of human labor and the dignity of the human person, but then goes all the way through to very recent ones, including Antiqua et Nova, which is about artificial intelligence. It wasn't an encyclical, but it was a doctrinal address. And I will actually start with something that I've done a lot of work at the university on, which is Laudato Si, where Pope Francis talked about integral ecology. But before I do that, in the encyclical Magnifica Humanitas, Pope Leo really talks about the Catholic social doctrine as the values that he uses and the framework that he uses and he says should be used in determining the role of AI in society. So, and he lists them and he spends a whole chapter on it. It's fascinating and it's very important to what comes after that. But I won't say more about that because I'm going to jump into the framework that he actually borrows from Laudato Si, as well as what came before that, where he defines first the technocratic paradigm as the tendency give me 1 second, excuse me. Yeah. The tendency to let the logic of efficiency, control, and profit alone shape personal decisions and social and economic decisions as well. And he says, when technology becomes the standard by which everything is judged, it begins to dictate what matters and what can be discarded and reduces creation to an object of exploitation and human beings being mere cogs in a system driven by profit and efficiency. And in that, he also borrows from Pope Francis' encyclical in talking about what I think is a very key point, and I think Jessica also brought it up, that technological products are not neutral. And I think this is a very important piece, and I'll come back to it later. In fact, on the next slide, I'll just talk about it. So as I went through the encyclical and as I was preparing this, two questions really came up in my mind. Can artificial intelligence help eradicate systemic inequities and social injustices, or will it amplify, automate, and conceal them? The reason you see the last bit of it put out bolded and in red is because that's actually my take on it. I believe that it will do so, and rather than being able to eradicate systemic inequities, one might consider it a more pessimistic viewpoint compared to what the Pope writes about in his encyclical. But as we go through this, I hope that I can provide you some of the reasoning why I remain somewhat pessimistic about the role of AI in society. But the second question is artificial intelligence inherently political in that it requires or strongly favors specific social and political arrangements to function? I teach that course on science, technology, and race. And this is a question that I ask my students about various forms of technology, not just AI, in that what is the nature or the political nature of artifacts, technological artifacts, whether it's a bridge or an overpass, whether it's nuclear power stations, nuclear weapons, or whether it's a tomato harvester that is used in tomato farms. What is the nature of the political nature of that particular technology? And in particular, the question of whether it's inherently political in the sense that in order for that technology to exist, it requires or strongly favors particular social and political arrangements to function. That is what I hope to answer at the end of the talk in terms of where I see it going. So let me jump into some examples for this. Each of these cases, I'm just going to talk briefly. I'm also going to give you a quote from the encyclical, because I want to emphasize that in his encyclical, the Pope really brings all these issues out, the very fundamental moral issues that he does. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that he does that, but also to note some of the examples that fit into that framework that he's using. So once again, the technocratic paradigm is key to understanding the Pope's approach to AI and its role in society. So the first example I actually give is about issue I want to talk about is about healthcare, because if you read through the encyclical, healthcare is one of the areas in which the Pope actually talks about the beneficial role that AI plays. Yet, whereas he's talking about it, he writes, important and sensitive decisions risk being fully delegated to automated systems that do not know compassion, mercy, forgiveness, and above all, the hope that people are able to change. And I think this is very key, and I highlighted automated systems because I think we're talking about the idea of autonomous systems involved in healthcare that are making decisions that are very detrimental to people's dignity, that are very detrimental to people's health itself, and are filled with biases. So a number of articles have been written about this. Research has been done that these AI systems are usually programmed in with the biases that we have. And even though these systems are change over time, the algorithms change over time and so on, some of these social biases that are built into these algorithms never disappear. And what it can do is have a particular very negative impact on patient care. So here's an example of that. The University of Chicago News and a number of other publications talked about this. So there was a case where a healthcare prediction algorithm was biased against Black patients. How did that happen? Because what was done was that instead of talking about the patient's health as a predictor for who needs more care, the algorithm used the cost of care, how much was actually used in how much money was spent in providing care as the determinant in who needs more care. So if you are white and you have health insurance and you have been receiving that health insurance and it's been costing a lot to treat you for whatever illness or disease you have, then the algorithm recognized that it was costing more and therefore chose you over a Black patient who didn't have access to healthcare may have had the same disease and in fact was in a similar condition, but was not able to get the care that they received and therefore had cost less for the system. So it's remarkable that it not only do Black patients, and in particular the Black community, have face discrimination in access to and affordability of healthcare, but these algorithms bake that into the system, into the artificial intelligence system itself, and further victimize them and further discriminate against them. A second example, and this before I go, there's a lot of words on the page here, but before I go any further, tell you that this has been one of my main areas of activism in Detroit, in the metropolitan Detroit area. I have actually been involved with a group called the Ferndale Inclusion Network that's been fighting on our automated license plate readers that were bought by our police department. We've also been fighting to eliminate from our city drones, as well as body-worn cameras and so on, and to stop the surveillance technologies that have been used by police departments around the Detroit metro area to surveil everybody. So the Pope talks about this. Justice demands that we prevent the emergence of new forms of exclusion and deprivations of freedom, communities exposed to invasive surveillance and opaque algorithms that perpetuate prejudice and discrimination. And it's very key that when you look at the city of Ferndale, for example, which is predominantly white, but borders the city of Detroit, just about everything you see on this page, on the left and the right column, are all forms of surveillance technologies that have been tried out in Detroit. And in fact, the standard argument is, well, if we have surveillance technologies, then we're not going to need more policing, we're going to need less policing. And data has shown that it's exactly the opposite. So imagine that they do have gunshot detectors in the city of Detroit, and a sound is heard and it is determined to be a gunshot, which, by the way, that is quite faulty many times. But a gunshot is recorded and immediately a bunch of police cars show up at that place. And in fact, if it happens a few times, then policing is, there's an increased policing in that place. So placing the surveillance in different areas, the surveillance technologies actually increases the amount of policing rather than decrease it, even though the argument being made is, if we have more of these surveillance technologies, we're going to be less discriminatory. The technology does not discriminate on the basis of race, and we'll actually be able to reduce the amount of policing that we need to do. But in fact, the case of Detroit shows that it's exactly the opposite. In particular, we have this case on the right side. You see predictive policing software. It is one of the most vicious, in my opinion, and most unfortunate forms of surveillance. Here's what happens. So there's a program known as Caucus. That's just an acronym. This is what it does. If an individual is being brought into court for determination of, for sentencing purposes. So they have been in court, they've been indicted for some crime that they committed, and now they're being brought in for criminal sentencing. Well, that I don't know how well you can see the questions on this form here, but notice some of these questions. I'll read them out to you. Some of the questions are, what were your usual grades in high school? Were you ever suspended or expelled from school? How often did you have conflicts with teachers? How strongly did you agree or disagree with the following? I always behaved myself in school. And how often did you get in fights while at school? So if you're a juvenile delinquent and you're being brought in for sentencing, you are actually required to fill out one of these forms. And because you're in detention, you typically don't have any opportunity to say no. But when you do, your answers are fed into these predictive algorithms about recidivism. How likely is it that you are going to commit another crime and end back up in jail or in detention? And I just want you to think about the fact that these kinds of questions, which could be answered by anybody and are probably true for most people, is now being used to determine what is the recidivism rate of a juvenile. And therefore, when this is brought in, the prosecutor brings in the results used by AI, presents it to the judge, and the judges automatically just go with whatever the predictive algorithm has determined. And as we well know, in a racist and racialized society, many of the juvenile cases brought before judges, especially in places like Detroit and so on, are Black and brown communities, the poor, and so on. So I think this is a highly discriminatory thing that happens in artificial intelligence use in criminal justice cases. Well, this was always of last year. I was not a citizen, and I went through hell for the first 6 months. I was a green card holder, very active in the Palestinian struggle for liberation, and now I'm a citizen. But I have 30 years worth of activism history on Palestine issues, as well as on foreign policy issues. And this remains a fear for me that there are databases and software that mines these databases, runs autonomously. Again, there's that idea, runs autonomously in order to figure out who deserves to be have their citizenship revoked. And in this day and age where we're seeing what's happening with the Trump administration and so on, it's remarkably dangerous to imagine that all of these softwares and surveillance technologies exist. I'm going to run out of time here, so I'll maybe be quick about a couple of things. Jessica already talked about Israel and the genocide in Gaza. And once again, the Pope talks about this: no algorithm can make war morally acceptable. Eli brought that up. I think it's absolutely critical here. And the Lavender was, apart from gospel, Lavender was the AI machine that was directing Israel's bombing spree. And I want you to notice that it was an AI targeting system with little human oversight and a permissive policy for casualties. So these are baked into the algorithm itself. And then this one, from the war in Iran. And as you know, as we all know, in the early days, there was a bombing of a school and 168 children died. And first of all, it was based on faulty data that was used that said that this was actually a Revolutionary Guard force armament or military location, when it actually was a school and had been so for a while, had its own website. But what was more disturbing is the fact that if you tried in Grok or Google to find out whether this image was a real image of the bombing, then you ended up finding out that there was a lot of AI slop that told you that, no, this was something that happened 2 years ago in some other place, and so on. So not only were all these children a casualty, not only were we engaged in a vicious war, but truth was also a casualty. One of the areas that I spend a lot of time working in is nuclear weapons abolition, and it turns out that a tabletop exercise done by researchers in London showed that an AI generated response to war games ended up using tactical nuclear weapons in all but one of the 21 games. There's a quote at the end: as more autonomous systems are given consequential tasks with less human oversight, the risks from ungoverned paths multiply. The last thing I'm going to talk about here is example is about AI and human dignity. And we know well that, well, I shouldn't say we know well, but we know that there are new forms of slavery and trafficking that have shown up, where predominantly young women and children and so on are being employed to produce the raw materials that are used in our computers, in these data centers and so on. And people all around the world, but particularly from the global south, are finding working for the massive companies predominantly in the United States, even as low as 97 cents an hour or so on. There's because of the time, I won't play this 60 minutes video that's about 3 minutes long or so. But one of the biggest cases that came up in recent years was a California-based company called Sama that employed a number of Kenyans in doing what is known as data labeling. So, when you go on Google or when you use AI and so on, you don't get to see all the worst things of bestiality, rape, murder, and just the worst forms of violence, highly disturbing images. And that's because people in Kenya and India and Venezuela and a number of other countries have been given the job at less than $2 an hour to take some of these most disturbing images, label them so that the AI does not reach into them when you ask a question in ChatGPT or even in your Google search and so on. And so the remarkable mental health effects on these young people in Kenya, as well as these other places, was highlighted by 60 Minutes. I wish I had time to show you that video, but I think it's
grunt work that needs to be done accurately,
and I'll move on. I won't talk about the environment. I want to end with just talking a little bit about the moral status of AI. So I want to just briefly compare it to the church's position on the nuclear question. The church clearly sees nuclear weapons and is inherently evil, used only for destructive purposes, but it has a very different opinion of nuclear energy, finds it morally neutral. But I would argue that the design of nuclear energy, even if it was seen as being morally neutral, is layered upon an inherently unjust order. So we know about that in the use of nuclear energy, there's radioactive colonialism where uranium is mined from indigenous lands. We know the problem of radioactive waste. We know that there's an authoritarian national security infrastructure that is needed for nuclear energy power plants and so on. And we also know that this was one of the main issues in the Iran war, because nuclear energy production can be a pipeline to nuclear weapons production, as the US does. AI has, according to the Pope's encyclical, exemplifies aspects of both technologies. But my take is this. Remember, I asked the question of whether AI is inherently political. I believe AI is inherently political and is radically redefining what it means to be human in ways that violate the principles of Catholic social teaching. And the reason it does that is because, as presently constituted, predominantly, AI is based on data mining. And that data mining takes all the data that we have about humans, as well as other social and historical biases, and uses them in order for its predictive power. It is required for its predictive power. And therefore, I think the idea of data mining is one of the ways in which the social and political environment is required to be structured in order that AI can function. I believe that right now, the way it is constituted, one, we cannot remove data mining from the equation and expect all these models of AI to work, though there are some that don't do it that way, but the dominant ones all are based on data mining that is done by private companies for their own benefit. And secondly, because that data mining is done on a historical and social basis and actually incorporates the biases, historical biases and the prejudices of society, it is remarkable for us to think about the idea that while AI may be deemed as not inherently evil, which is what the Pope does in the encyclical, we would have to reimagine across all forms of AI how humans that feed, control, and use AI could liberate themselves from the racism, the sexism, the militarism, and colonialism that is embedded in that very data that feeds AI. So it's not enough for us to make, as I think Jessica and Eli said, try to make AI more moral. It is that society itself has embedded with all these prejudices. And I think that the dominant models of AI cannot be reformed in a way that separates them from the biases that exist in society. And that's why I say it is inherently political and can only work and currently only works in a system that involves data mining from all sectors, and this data is owned by private companies and used and is embedded within it are these social and political prejudices. I will stop there. I did have some recommendations for the kinds of things that I think from an activist framework what should be done, but we can have that as part of our discussion later. Thank you.
Deep gratitude for you and your work and your sharing, Prasad.
Thank you.
Let's take another moment to distill what we have heard. And if there is a word or phrase or question that continues to stay with us, I invite you to enter that into the chat. Some of the echoes contain calling it racism fits very well. Yes, it is not neutral. Good point on nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, which is not neutral. Oh, what a night. Compassion and mercy needed. AI amplifies injustice, inherent. Data mining embedded with social and political prejudices. Prasad's framing question for his students, which was, can AI help eradicate systemic inequalities and social injustices, or will it amplify, automate, and conceal them? Human dignity, the need to stress inclusion, not exclusion, underlying systems and structures, and the immorality of AI. Healthcare without compassion, mercy, and forgiveness is not care. And the immorality of nuclear energy. We have just over 12 minutes left. I have a few questions that have come in the chat. And so I wonder if I could read those two questions because they're both related. And then I'd also like to note that Prasad said he had some suggestions, action steps, but we just didn't get to that time. So I'm going to read those two questions and then also recognize that we'd like to hear some of those action steps from Prasad, and then I'll turn it back to our panelists to hop in and answer those questions. Unfortunately, there's so much to talk about, yet we are limited by our time. So the two questions that came up, one was from Rosemary Pace of Pax Christi, New York State, who says, just today, a longtime member of Pax Christi, New York State, asked if just war theory applies only to individuals or to nations as well. Can a country reject just war theory? Another member of Pax Christi, New York State shared a response that raised the idea that rejecting war is definitely an individual right, but that as a nation needs to protect its whole population, perhaps requiring military defense. What say you? I can note that war, especially in recent history, does not protect civilians of a nation, but endangers them extremely. Julie noted, it's easy to reject war on an individual basis, but how can we start rejecting war and create and start implementing different strategies at the national level? Oh, and also Tracy asked, this question was mainly for Jessica, the distinction between AI and AGI, once again. So I'm going to put those three in the chat so we have those visually. And it seems like then we've got one question for Eli, the pieces on just war, a question for Jessica, clarification question, and then Prasad, please share with us some of the action steps that we didn't have time to cover. Whoever would like to answer first.
Maybe we should go in the order of how we spoke. So if Eli wants to go.
All right. Yeah. So the question about do nations need kind of war or military defense to protect its people? It's a really critical question, right? And there's some gray areas here. We do want to seek and use effective ways to protect people. Like we share that commitment. And then when we look at the research and the evidence, war hasn't been that effective in protection or particularly sustainable peace. So I'll share with you kind of a research doc kind of after this, but some of the things the social scientists have found is that has a poor success rate. It usually leaves both sides worse off than before. The vast majority of deaths are civilians, leads to huge spikes in poverty. Military interventions normally prolong the conflict, and mass atrocities almost always emerge out of wars already underway, 70% of the time when regimes face an armed insurgency. So, this is going to be kind of a process of investing, piloting various forms of nonviolent defense, unarmed protection, nonviolent resistance, civilian-based defense. Some countries have actually already incorporated civilian-based defense as part of their defense policy, like Lithuania, Latvia, and so forth. And some countries don't even have militaries, like Costa Rica, Panama. So, international law, I think, will still stay in place as this process unfolds. But the church can better help move us in this direction by kind of letting go of using just war theory and speech and advocacy. The US government used to have funding that they supported unarmed protection in South Sudan, for example, and they had a people power fund to support nonviolent resistance movements. And we're going to have to try to reestablish that. And we can do that by identifying and working with congressional allies and kind of passive allies to get them to be more active. We can do that by providing evidence and research and examples in our advocacy. And we can do it by nonviolent skill training hubs that create the society that will create the leaders that are needed to kind of do this. And at this point in time, it's really important to build these practices, unarmed protection, nonviolent resistance, civilian-based defense in our local cities and states, get them established and normalized, as well as kind of normalizing just peace reasoning in our circles and our networks and our advocacy. These are all ways to kind of help kind of move the national dimensions.
Thank you, Eli. Jessica.
So on this question of AI versus AGI, in popular culture, what this kind of means that is AGI is kind of under the umbrella of artificial intelligence, and I think probabilistic automation is the better term. But you can think of AGI as this idea that AI will spontaneously become conscious. And I'm really oversimplifying here. There's different Turing tests about levels and different models that this can mean. But to get a little bit more specific, I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence first. This very term was really most helpful or can be understood best as a marketing term. Artificial intelligence itself, just as I was sharing and how this term was first coined in 1956, does not refer to a coherent set of technologies. So discussions about AI or what AI even means generally become more lucid when narrowed down specifically to the automation of specific tasks by performing statistical analyses of large data sets. So technologies can be better called probabilistic automation, and these include but are not limited to large language models or LLMs that people call chatbots or conversation simulators is a better term, other generative AI systems and other applications of machine learning models. So that's kind of AI in general. That's like your biggest circle, if you will. And to narrow down a little bit more on generative AI or conversation simulators, a June 2025 report by the Apple Machine Learning Research organization actually proved what had been clear to tech whistleblowers for quite a while, which is that generative AI systems will never be capable of intelligence. And this was published by Apple Machine Learning. Generative AI is guessing, not thinking. Generative AI is a subfield of artificial intelligence that uses generative methods to generate text, images, videos, audio, software, code, or other forms of data. And on this topic of generative AI, which AGI would fall under, I wanted to say that Denmark also became the first country to give people, all their citizens, a copyright of their face. There are so many issues with deepfakes and myriad issues, but Denmark and Norway are some countries that are helping lead legislation that can help these things. So I hope that's helpful, but these are some ways to distinguish between AI and AGI, or this AGI kind of in popular terms, like the idea that it will become conscious or surpass human thinking. But as Mark Zuckerberg also said, he can't explain what AGI is, but it is the religion of a lot of Silicon Valley elites.
Thank you, Jessica. And Prasad.
Sure. One of the hardest things, especially after hearing the webinar like this, or even learning about AI in other forms and reading about it, is to know what to do. It seems overwhelming, pervasive, and deeply mystified and mysterious. But as was pointed out earlier, there are ways in your own life and in your community that collective action can be taken. So my first one would be to say, struggling against data centers. Even if you can't have the moratorium that Jessica talked about, which I think is absolutely critical, to fight against data centers and to emphasize citizen control and limiting the power of private capital is probably one of the most important. So if you have a data center struggle going on in your community or in your area, join it. Join it. Because even if you lose the battle against the data center, you would have raised consciousness about AI, what AI does, and its effect on the environment. The second, and I say it from my own activism, check in your city all the ways in which surveillance technologies are being used and artificial intelligence is being used by your city. And I think this is critical. So for example, license plate readers, body-worn cameras, drones, and you will see that it is connected to highly inflated police department budgets, therefore increasing the surveillance of citizens and increasing the authoritarian structure of society. So fighting against it and using the language of solidarity, using the language of friendship and fraternity and so on, and community relations is going to be absolutely critical. One of the things that AI does, and I think all these surveillance technology do, is of course, it dehumanizes us in many ways and fragments even our sense of self. If we have a fragmented sense of self, we're also in a fragmented sense of society. One of the things that has happened over the last 50, even 100 years is that we have lost community centers. We have lost those spaces of intergenerational relationships in our communities. We used to have churches and union halls and community centers and parks and libraries and schools where people of multiple generations used to meet. So I think it's important for us in our local communities to try and rebuild those in an inclusive, intergenerational way. I think this can be done. We're actually doing it in Ferndale. And I know it's being done all across the country, and I think it's something that we can do. We can step into this. So there are many others. I would love to see Pax Christi and others just have a conference on AI and the future of humanity, just on itself. I think it will be absolutely critical. What does it mean to be human in a world of AI is absolutely a essential question. And the last thing I'll say is we should center our activism, our lives, and our social relationships around the principle of integral ecology that Pope Francis talked about, that the environmental, economic, social, and cultural dimensions of life are deeply intertwined. We should hear the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth together, and we should make a preferential option for the poor and all of creation. And I'll end with this because I told this to my students when they invited me to a Chem Club retreat on the occasion of Martin Luther King Jr. Day many years ago. I started with their chemistry students. I said, "How old are you?" And they, of course, give me their typical ages. And I say, "Consider this, that the hydrogen that is coursing through your veins in the form of water in your body is about 14 billion years old. 13 to 14 billion years old. It was formed in the first few minutes after the Big Bang. And therefore, you are actually one with all of the universe in that hydrogen has never been formed any time other than when the universe got started. And that should tell us about our connection to all of creation. You don't have to be religious. You can take science and be connected to all of creation. And I think that kind of knowledge, that kind of understanding brings us a very new sense of who we are and what our place is, and really builds in that idea of love and peace and friendship, not only among humans, but also in all of creation to the forefront. I think that's the kind of message we should lead with in our activism with.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, let's have a round of applause. I see all the emojis for our speakers. We have much to think about and to integrate, and we very much appreciate those specific key points. We will put those in our follow-up email along with any of the resources and slides that our speakers have shared. We've got some great comments in the chat. Hydrogen baby, thank you. Multiple claps. A few announcements before we close in prayer. Just wanted to say thank you to all who donated to Pax Christi USA for tonight's program. Pax Christi USA exists thanks to your financial donations and support. So thanks to you, we were able to raise $935 tonight, which will continue to go towards Pax Christi USA and supporting our members like you. The recording of this webinar will be on our YouTube channel, and everyone who registered will receive the recording link as well as the resources. And then lastly, we also invite you to continue to engage with what we're calling the truth telling for the 250th year campaign. There are prayer, study, and action resources on the website, and I'll drop all of those in the chat right now. So in our last moments together, I invite you to join in a prayer that Pax Christi USA has adapted from the last paragraph of Magnifica Humanitas. I'll also put this in the chat. It calls on Mary, the woman of the Magnificat, the anti-colonial prayer of resistance. So we pray. With the same faith as Mary, let us become weavers of hope in our world, sharing who we are and what we have, so that the presence of Jesus may grow among us and that God's kingdom may take shape. In the humble fidelity of daily life, even in the era of AI, can become a time in which the Holy Spirit brings about the civilization of love in our lives. Indeed, God continues to make all things new and offers every era the possibility of becoming part of the salvation history in the light of the Incarnation. We entrust our prayer, study, and action for a civilization of love to Mary of Nazareth, the mother of Jesus, the woman of the anti-colonial prayer of resistance, the Magnificat, that she may guide our steps through this time of change and persevere in each of us true faith with the gospel, so that we may bear witness to the grandeur of humanity. Amen. Thank you again to our speakers, Jessica Sun, Eli McCarthy, Prasad Venugopal. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciated this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you all so much. What a gift.